I was on my knees on the cold bathroom tiles, coughing so hard my entire chest shook. The steam from the shower made the air heavy and sharp. I gripped the edge of the sink just to stay upright. My skin was pale, my hands trembling. My throat felt like it was tearing every time I tried to breathe. The doctors told me this part would be rough. The side effects would be hell. But I still wasn't prepared for how it made me feel like I was aging 50 years in 5 seconds. I tried to swallow back the burn rising in my throat and whispered to myself, "Just breathe. Just get through this minute." The floor felt like ice under my knees. I slid down until my cheek pressed the cold tile because standing took everything from me. I blinked slowly, fighting the dizziness. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video. The bathroom door suddenly swung open with a slam, and my mom stepped in like she owned the world. Her face didn't show even an inch of concern. It was annoyance, eyes narrow, disgust heavy, like I was an inconvenience blocking her path to the mirror. "Seriously?" she said, waving her hand like she was shooing a stray animal. "Do this somewhere else. Don't make this house look like a hospice." I tried to lift my head. I couldn't talk. My voice wasn't coming out. She stepped over my body like I wasn't her daughter. Like I was dirt she didn't want to step in. She adjusted her hair in the mirror and muttered, "Don't die in here. If you're going to collapse, go outside like trash." Those words sliced deeper than anything happening inside my body. She walked away, humming, like nothing she said mattered. She didn't even look back. The light buzzed above me, flickering, and my vision blurred around the edges. My legs felt numb. My pulse was slow. I reached blindly for my water bottle, but it rolled away across the floor. Somewhere in the hallway, I heard my sister laughing on a phone call like this house had never seen suffering. They were ordering sushi for lunch. She was talking about a new ring some guy bought her. My mom called out from the kitchen complaining she needed the house quiet because her online yoga class was starting soon. And I was lying there, weak from cancer treatment, like a broken object thrown in some forgotten corner. I dragged myself out of the bathroom quietly when I could finally move again, using the wall to stand because my legs felt like paper. I didn't ask for help. I didn't expect concern. I walked past my family like I was invisible in my own home. I sat in the corner of the living room and pulled a small blanket over my shoulders while the two of them talked about my sister's new spa appointment. No one even glanced at me. No one asked if I needed water. No one asked if I was okay. They didn't care if I made it. They only cared if I inconvenienced them. In that silence, I realized this wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate. Cruelty disguised as normal. And for the first time, it hit me. They expected me to just quietly survive whatever they threw at me. They expected me to take it until the end. That moment on the bathroom floor became the moment I decided something different. If I survived this, I would make sure they never treated me like disposable trash, ever again. The next few weeks blurred into a routine of treatment, exhaustion, and silence. I stopped expecting anything from them. I learned to move in the house like a ghost. I ate quiet. I spoke less. I conserved every ounce of energy I had for survival instead of defending myself to people who wanted me to feel worthless. The more I pulled inward, the more irritated they became, because cruelty only works when the victim still reacts. My sister started mocking my weak, dramatic energy whenever I coughed or took longer to sit down. "She acts like she's the first sick person in history," she joked to my mom one night, loud enough for the entire house to hear. My mom clicked her tongue and said, "It's mental. She wants attention." They laughed like I wasn't in the next room trying to stop my hands from shaking long enough to write out a list of meds I needed covered. They still asked for money, even when I was barely able to walk, even when I needed every cent to cover treatment visits and co-pays and transportation. My dad called one night acting concerned for exactly 18 seconds before switching topics to the fact my sister wanted to take a weekend trip to a spa resort 2 hours away. "You can contribute something small," he said, like this was normal. "She needs relaxation. Stress is bad for women. I stared at the phone, speechless. I realized there was no sickness extreme enough, no danger severe enough, that would cause them to switch roles and protect me. Their priority was permanent. Their version of family had been carved in stone long before I ever questioned who deserved support. The breaking point wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a breakdown. It was when I sat alone on a metal bench outside the treatment center waiting for my ride, and I watched other families helping their sick loved ones into cars, holding hands, adjusting jackets, speaking softly, comforting without thinking. I stared at them like I was staring at another species. I had spent years believing that one day my parents would wake up, shocked by their own cruelty, ashamed, suddenly ready to try. But sitting there, watching strangers care for their people effortlessly, I realized my parents were not broken temporarily. They were exactly who they chose to be, and expecting anything else was me slowly killing myself emotionally. That night, I made a call to the social worker assigned to my case. I found out I qualified for temporary relocation support for patients who needed a safer space during treatment. It meant a shared unit, but stable, clean, safe. I had to fill forms, prove income, show medical documents, all things I already had because I tracked everything. I had never filled something with so much focus. Within 9 days, I got the approval. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my sister. I waited until they left for lunch like they always did on Sundays, and I slowly packed what belonged to me, not them. A small suitcase, my meds, my treatment notes, my laptop, 3 sweaters, 1 photo of myself when I was still hopeful. When they got home, my mom stood in the doorway and squinted. "Where are you going now?" I zipped the last pocket shut and looked at her calmly. "Somewhere I'm not treated like trash?" She laughed like it was a joke. "You won't last a week without us." I looked her in the eye and said, "You never cared if I lasted with you." I walked out. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I didn't need a dramatic, tearful goodbye. The sick, weak version of me collapsed in the bathroom months ago. Now this version walked out the door, alive, quiet, and done. When I shut that door, I knew the revenge coming later would not be poetic, not mild, not soft. It would be earned. It would be direct. It would be consequence. And I would not have to lift a violent finger to make it real. Because the best revenge wasn't silence. It was finally making sure they'd need me more than I'd ever need them again. I settled into the small unit with the efficiency of someone who knew the difference between panic and procedure. The walls were thin, the furniture basic, but every corner was mine for the first time in my life. I learned to sleep between chemo sessions, to stagger appointments so Mason could go to school without seeing me hooked up, to cook soup that didn't taste like defeat. The quiet steadied me. So did paperwork, appointment slips, referral letters, charity forms. Where panic had once been my default, now process was. A volunteer coordinator at the treatment center noticed me the same way people noticed a machine that worked without complaint. She pulled me aside one afternoon. "You're organized. You actually make the schedulers' jobs easier." She asked if I could spare a few hours once a week helping with outreach, intake calls, eligibility checks, filling out travel assistance requests for patients whose families couldn't afford transport. At first it felt like a favor I did because it got me out of the room and into the world. I showed up to the small office every Tuesday evening and learned how the safety net really worked, who qualified for free transport, who could get medication delivered, what paperwork tipped a case into urgency. I learned the exact phrasing that made an application pass and the tiny omissions that caused it to stall. I learned where bureaucracy was merciful and where it was merciless. I watched people who deserved help get it, and I watched people who lied get turned away. The irony sat there. For years, my parents had used me as their bypass, the one who solved problems without proof, who paid when they claimed they could not, who smoothed questions and made systems bend. Now I had a role that required proofs. Now I saw their world from the inside, and I could follow procedure with the same discipline they had never given me. It started small. A month after I moved out, my sister texted me asking for an address where she could send a check for a medical necessity. Actually, a pricey filler treatment the clinic didn't cover. She worded it dramatic and needy, like the old script. I didn't reply. She called. I didn't pick up. She came by my old apartment, stomped around in my mother's voice, and left halfway through the living room rant when a neighbor asked what was happening. That embarrassment was satisfying, small and human, but I wasn't in this to humiliate. I was in this to enforce a boundary that would stick. When the center's outreach coordinator announced an opening in patient services, I applied. I had experience. I had the quiet paperwork habit. I had the refusal to let pity substitute for evidence. I got the job because I did the boring, right things other people skipped. 2 promotions later, I was the person who reviewed, approved, or escalated requests for transport assistance and emergency copay help. The first call that came from home was quiet. Mom's number appeared on my phone while I was at my desk, sorting through a stack of intake forms. I let it ring. I watched the caller ID like a small animal. Finally, I hit accept. "Your father fell down," she said. It was not a plea. It was information packaged as accusation. "He needs to get to the clinic for a scan. We don't have money for the taxi. Can you schedule a ride?" There were 3 things I could do. Approve it because he was my father, escalate it because of medical urgency, or ask for what the policy always asked for: proof of the incident, a short intake from a clinician, a form the ER completed. I asked for the form. Silence on the line. Then, "We don't have it, just do it. You always do it." I read the protocol aloud from the computer screen. "We require verification for non-emergency transport. We require an intake form for priority scheduling. We can provide community transport under X conditions." I could hear my words doing the administrative work they had always withheld from me. My mother sounded flustered, then furious. "You're making this hard. This is your family." I stayed calm. "Give me the clinic name and the attending doctor. If it's an immediate emergency, call 911. If not, get the intake form filled and upload. I can't schedule without it." They didn't have the form. They didn't know the clinician. They thought their entitlement could be processed like a favor. I hung up and I watched the system do exactly what it was supposed to: route, queue, wait for proper documentation. Nothing magical happened. They had to actually produce something resembling proof. When they realized they couldn't, they tried to come in person. Security picked them up at the front desk and explained the required procedures. I watched from my office window as Dad argued with a clerk. He waved his hands like he'd always done, expecting a human to take pity and shortcut the rules. No one did. They walked out with a printed checklist and the exact line items they'd always refused to follow. More calls followed, each one a loop of the old script: guilt, fury, promises of repayment, old manipulative tactics that once made me hand over cash. I stopped answering. I started processing their requests formally like any other applicant. If they wanted a waiver for transport, they needed to fill out the waiver. If they wanted a medication copay covered, they needed an intake note and a current billing statement. If they needed financial assistance, they had to show prior attempts at support, complete a brief household income form, and provide ID. Word travels inside small systems. The family that once breezed through my life expecting favors now waded through forms anyone else did. Kaylee's Instagram posts that braid wealth didn't help when the center asked for bank statements showing she couldn't pay. My parents' casual expectation that I'd be there saving the day vanished into the stack of missing paperwork. There were moments I felt nothing but administrative righteousness. There were moments I felt terrible. Watching my father, who'd pushed me into gravel years ago, sweating in the lobby while I completed a verification form on my terminal. He pressed his face to the glass and mouthed an apology that was unguarded and useless. After every submission, the system required a waiting period and deposit or third-party verification. Their world of cash and charm couldn't cross that line. It was also quiet revenge, the kind that doesn't make noise on the internet. I didn't post receipts or evidence anywhere. I didn't call family meetings. I followed rules. I enforced policy. Procedure does its own damaging work when exposure isn't an option. When I denied a transport waiver because of missing intake, it wasn't cruelty. It was fairness. It was the same fairness I had never been given. One fall morning, months into this, my mom showed up at our door. at the patient center's outreach office with a paper bag of food and a pleading expression. She wanted me to sign a form that would allow the center to fast-track her emergency. I told her to fill out the intake. She tried to hand me the bag as if bribery were a shortcut. I took it and placed it on the counter, then handed her a clipboard. "We need your ID and the referral," I said. Her eyes flashed. "After everything I did for you, you would make me do this?" Everything she did for me had been a rehearsal of indifference. I slid the clipboard toward her and watched as she fumbled. She refused to complete it. She threw the pen. She left again, not because she had no shame, but because the system required a humility she never practiced. I watched them learn humility through forms and waiting lists and deposit requests. I watched them lose the advantage of my immediate smoothing and quick cash. I watched them find out, slowly and confusingly, that the economy of our family had been running on my invisible labor for years. They had built their life on the assumption that someone else would always clean up their messes. I stopped being that someone. There were hard moments. When Dad needed help getting to an urgent clinic because rash and fever had spiked, I didn't let the little rules become traps. I authorized transport because the intake was completed by the attending nurse. I nursed the balance between humanity and consequence. Revenge had never been my goal, survival and boundaries were. But consequence came with it, inevitably. The final thing that changed them wasn't a single administrative denial. It was the slow collapse of their safety net. Neighbor favors dried up. Cousins stopped answering calls because they were tired of bailing them out. The church group that once coordinated meals for everyone started asking about past contributions. People tolerated them when their family looked whole. When the bookkeeping showed gaps and the habit of borrow and blame became obvious, social patience thinned. One afternoon, my father approached the clinic windows while I pushed Mason on the swings outside the center. He looked smaller than I remembered, hunched, and the swagger gone. He made a motion like he would come speak to me, but he stopped when a nurse walked past and gave me a small, polite nod. He stood there, half apology, half demand, and I kept pushing Mason. He called after a few hours, voice trembling in a way I hadn't heard since I was a child. "Are you okay?" I answered simply, "We're fine." He tried to pivot. He tried to beg. He tried to promise. He said he'd change. I listened and then ended the call. The big shift had happened quietly and structurally. I had not announced war. I had not exposed or shamed. I had taken on responsibility in a place where accountability mattered, and I had let the normal consequences of accountability do the rest. Months later, when people asked me how I survived, how I moved from humiliation to stability, I told them the truth. I stopped giving them short-term rescue and forced them into the long-term work they'd never been willing to do. I built supports that required form and proof. The same supports they had used to exploit me. The difference was now they had to comply with those supports like everyone else. Mason learned to run without looking back. He learned to climb playground ladders and trust that if he fell, I would pick him up, not that someone else would make the fall easier on him at my expense. That was the clearest victory. The last time, my mother stood on our doorstep, pushing a small bag of things she thought we might use. She didn't call me names. She only asked for a little practical help, a ride to a clinic for a non-urgent checkup. I handed her a printed list of the documentation required for the charity transport and showed her the intake form. She looked at the paper as if it were a foreign language. I told her quietly, "Fill it out. Bring proof. We'll process it like everyone else." She left without a word. When she walked away, I heard the pavement under her heels and felt the sun on Mason's hair. I felt no satisfaction and no gloating. I felt a slow, clean calm I hadn't known as a child. They had never wanted to be better. They had wanted to be served. I had finally stopped serving them. I pushed Mason on the swing once more, watching his legs pump the air, and in the small, ordinary sound of his laughter, there was a single, unarguable fact. The life I built protected what mattered most to me. When I looked up and saw my father standing at the edge of the park watching, he raised a hand, not demanding, not begging. Just a small, awkward motion, like someone checking if a door was open. I did not move to open it. I kept my hands on the ropes and kept pushing my son into sunlight. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.